March 2021. The damp, cold air enveloped the storage warehouse of the Dallas Police Department in Texas, a place holding tens of thousands of old, dust-covered files. The beam from technician Samuel Ortiz's flashlight swept across rows of rusted steel shelves, pausing on a dark, weathered cardboard box labeled D1-142, MP73-142. He whispered into his radio, "I need to log this file. The seal is still intact." His voice echoed in the silent space, amid the smell of old paper and rusted metal. What began as a routine inventory for a digitization project turned into an unexpected turning point. Something had been awakened after nearly half a century of dormancy. Inside the box were pieces of evidence once deemed insignificant. A piece of light-colored fabric, a silver earring, and a few faded black and white photos. These were the last items collected in the summer of 1973, the summer when Sarah Marie Clarke, a 19-year-old girl, vanished while heading to work in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas. For nearly half a century, Sarah's disappearance was just a faint crack in the city's memory. A thin file sat in a metal cabinet stamped inactive, a forgotten name, a family left without answers. That August, Dallas sweltered under heat exceeding 100 degrees. The morning Sarah left home, her mother vividly recalled the soft click of the door and her daughter's final smile. She never made it to the sun-bright laundromat on Jefferson Boulevard, and no one saw her afterward. Only the piece of light-colored fabric found near a drainage ditch and the lone earring her mother instantly recognized remained. No body, no witnesses, no trace. Before we continue this haunting story, take a second to hit subscribe and like this video. Your support helps bring these forgotten cases back into the light, so those silenced for decades can speak again. The discovery in the Dallas storage warehouse was more than just finding an old box of files. It was the starting point for a chain of events that would unearth secrets buried deep beneath Texas soil. Because when authorities finally identified a suspect in 2021, it wasn't a stranger, not a drifter, not a faceless shadow. It was a man questioned during the original 1973 investigation, then released, living among the community for decades as if nothing had happened. The Sarah Marie Clarke case is not just a mystery solved. It is a testament to a city's refusal to forget its victims, to the power of forensic science and DNA technology, and to the people who believe that justice, though delayed, can still return. When Sarah disappeared, fear spread through Oak Cliff like wildfire on parched ground. Neighbors grew suspicious of one another. Families locked their doors. The search for the young girl revealed deep cracks in a community that seemed peaceful. Those cracks would explode when the truth finally emerged after 48 years. What makes this case particularly haunting is that the answers were always so close. In the police department's own storage, in a dusty car in a Fort Worth suburban garage, and in the DNA of a man who thought he'd escaped his past. A man who still went to the market, attended church, chatted with neighbors, carrying Dallas's darkest secret. Tonight, we return to 1973. Tracing the steps of a disappearance that shook an entire city and exploring how an old piece of fabric could change the history of Texas investigations. This is a story of loss, perseverance, deception, and justice delayed but never denied. Dallas, Texas, summer of 1973. The stifling air blanketed the Oak Cliff neighborhood, where low wooden houses lined dusty red streets, and the hum of AM radios played dreamy country tunes mixed with the clatter of old air conditioners. The morning began like any other, with early sunlight streaming through porches, casting rays on thin curtains in the small Clarke family home. Sarah Marie Clarke, 19 years old, was getting ready for her morning shift at Sunbright Laundry on Jefferson Boulevard. She was the only one living with her mother, a woman who worked at a nearby grocery store. Sarah slipped on a simple light blue blouse, tied her hair back with a ribbon, and tucked a lunchbox prepared by her mother into her bag. Before leaving, she paused at the door, looking out at the sunlit street where old Ford and Chevrolet cars crawled through the heat rising from the asphalt. Her mother, from the kitchen, called out something, but Sarah only smiled, then stepped out, her shoes tapping lightly on the sidewalk. Neighbors saw her, nodded in greeting, and then her figure faded behind the row of trees along the road, blending into the quiet rhythm of a Dallas morning. Time passed slowly. By noon, a dry wind and fine dust swirled through the neighborhood, the sky turning hazy. When her mother returned from her own shift, Sarah's bicycle was still parked outside, her room as tidy as it had been that morning. The mother sat waiting, glancing at the clock, waiting longer until the sun sank behind the low rooftops. Sarah hadn't returned. The house phone was picked up repeatedly, calls to the laundromat, to old school friends, to Sarah's former employer. No one knew where she was. As dusk settled, the neighborhood dimmed under faint yellow streetlights, and a sense of unease spread like thin smoke. The mother opened the door, stepped onto the porch, and stared at the empty street, clutching a photo of her daughter. The wind rustled through the trees, leaves whispering, no sound of cars, no sign she'd return. As the clock neared midnight, she went back inside and sat by the phone. The small room was lit only by a desk lamp, the steady tick of the second hand cutting through the thick air of worry. After a moment's hesitation, she took a deep breath and dialed. On the other end, the phone at the Dallas Police Department's Oak Cliff substation rang in the quiet night. The officer on duty, a young rookie, jotted down the mother's frantic account before transferring the call to a superior. Within half an hour, a patrol car was dispatched to the small neighborhood where the Clarke family lived. 2 officers stepped into the lit-up house where the mother waited in her work clothes, still dusted from the grocery store. On the table was an old photo of Sarah, a brown-haired girl with a round face and bright eyes. They asked basic questions. How tall was Sarah? How much did she weigh? What did she usually wear? Did she have a boyfriend? The mother answered slowly, her voice tight with worry. She said her daughter was gentle, came straight home from work, only went to church on weekends, and never left without telling her. One officer took notes, his pen moving mechanically. A missing person report was opened that night, temporarily coded MP73-142, a number meaningless to them then, but one that would echo for decades. The next morning, 2 detectives were assigned to the case. They visited the Clarke home, walked through Sarah's small room, checked her closet, her desk, searching for signs she might have planned to leave. No letters, no suitcase, nothing but a few notebooks, a small radio, and a wall calendar marked with her work shifts for the next week. Everything suggested she hadn't prepared to disappear. A neighbor was called in, confirming they saw Sarah leave the house the previous morning as usual, bag in hand. No one in the neighborhood heard screams or any disturbance. When the detectives asked about a boyfriend, the mother shook her head. She dated a boy from church, but they broke up last spring, no one else. In the initial report, police noted, no signs of forced entry, no missing personal items, likelihood of voluntary departure, low. Still, they held the theory she might have gone off with friends, as missing young adults were often assumed to leave willingly at the time. That afternoon, another detective visited the Sunbright Laundry. The owner confirmed Sarah was scheduled for the morning shift, but never arrived. No one in the area recalled seeing her that day. After checking local hospitals and finding no record of her, police filed an internal report recommending further checks on her usual route to work. A map of Oak Cliff was spread out on a table in the small missing persons unit's meeting room. A red ink line was drawn from the Clarke house to the laundromat, less than 2 miles. They marked points to check: the Gulf gas station on the corner, a small diner on Jefferson Boulevard, and an empty lot where kids played ball. 2 officers were assigned to canvass those spots the next morning. Before leaving, one of the team whispered to a colleague, maybe she just took off for a few days. But the mother stayed awake in the house, unable to sleep. Every passing car made her look up, hoping her daughter would walk through the door. As dawn broke, she had sat motionless all night, Sarah's photo still in her hands. On the second morning after her disappearance, a preliminary report was sent to the Dallas Police Department's main headquarters, and the case was officially handed to the city's missing persons unit. In the department's dense paperwork, Sarah Marie Clarke's name was added to the list of those yet to return. No one in that room knew this would mark the start of a case spanning nearly half a century. The next morning, Oak Cliff was still quiet as the first patrol cars rolled slowly through its narrow streets. Police began an official search, coordinating with dozens of volunteers and firefighters. They divided the area into small grids on the map, numbered in red ink, and searched in groups. Men from the neighborhood brought flashlights, shovels, and ropes. Women brought coffee and cold water for the searchers. They started on Jefferson Boulevard, Sarah's usual route. then fanned out around the wooden houses, vacant lots, and old drainage ditches behind the neighborhood. The atmosphere was both urgent and heavy. August heat soaked their shirts, dust caked their shoes, but everyone worked in silence, broken only by occasional calls echoing from a distance. In a brief meeting at a makeshift police post, the lieutenant in charge announced no direct witnesses had seen Sarah after she left home. A few people reported seeing a young girl in a light-colored shirt on Jefferson that morning, but no one could confirm her face. A truck driver mentioned a dark-colored car stopped by the roadside, but couldn't recall the license plate. Statements were logged, filed under needs verification. On the first day, searchers found only unrelated items: a plastic bag, an old bus ticket, an empty soda can. Nothing of value. By afternoon, rain fell, soaking the streets and washing away any potential traces. On the second day, police shifted the search to southern Oak Cliff, an area with more vacant lots and old warehouses. They used scent dogs along the drainage ditches leading to a small creek, but found nothing. No human scent, no personal items. Flyers with Sarah's picture were posted at stores, gas stations, and churches. The local paper ran a brief notice: police investigate disappearance of young woman in Oak Cliff. In the temporary meeting room of the missing persons unit, the city map grew cluttered with red marks indicating searched areas. A young officer stared at the map and muttered, "If it was an accident, we'd have found her by now." The commander didn't respond. He knew it. Cases like this in Dallas often ended in silence, but there was still hope, as nothing confirmed Sarah had left the area. On the afternoon of the third day, the exhausted search team regrouped at the end of Jefferson Boulevard. A hot, dry wind carried the smell of engine oil and asphalt. A man with binoculars reported seeing something shiny in a ditch. Police checked, but it was just a piece of metal reflecting sunlight. Nothing. An older officer closed his notebook, whispering to a colleague that, if no trace was found today, the chances of finding her alive were slim. That night, the search team pulled back, leaving 2 patrol cars to circle the area. The Dallas sky was thick with clouds, moonless. Car headlights reflected off wet streets, glinting on iron fences and old billboards. In the small Oak Cliff house, the mother sat by a cracked open window, listening to distant sirens. At the station, file MP73-142 was updated with a few lines. 3 days post-disappearance, no definitive trace. Witness accounts inconsistent. The next morning, superiors approved expanding the search to nearby neighborhoods, including the industrial west side with old warehouses and abandoned lots. A small team was sent to check gas stations and repair shops, asking if anyone recalled a young woman passing through. Every answer was the same: "Don't know, don't remember, never saw her." Dallas remained loud and sunlit as always, but to the police, every road now seemed to lead to nowhere. The final pages of the third day's report held only a brief note: search expanded, no new findings. On the morning of the 4th day of the search, with the sun not yet harsh, a group of patrol officers and 2 local volunteers continued combing a vacant lot on the southern edge of Oak Cliff, near a road leading to a small highway. The area was rarely visited, covered with knee-high weeds and a few old trees casting shadows on cracked, dry ground. While walking along a shallow ditch, an officer named Robert Finch bent down, noticing something unusual: a piece of light-colored fabric caught on a blade of grass, one end frayed and caked with dried mud. A few steps away, the ground showed clear tire tracks veering slightly toward the ditch. He radioed the team leader. The group quickly cordoned off a 10-meter radius, marking the scene with wooden stakes and nylon tape. A crime scene technician arrived with a camera and evidence collection kit. They carefully photographed the area, measured the distance between the fabric and the tire tracks, and noted it in the report. The tire size suggested a mid-sized sedan, common in those years. Nearby, some grass blades were broken, slanting toward the ditch, as if someone had slipped or been dragged. Everything was photographed, labeled, and placed in evidence bags. The light-colored fabric, after a preliminary rinse with distilled water, revealed a dark brown stain resembling old blood. The technician noted it, but determining the blood type required sending the sample to the Dallas Police Department's lab, with results taking days. As the team left the scene, the commander stood looking at the empty lot, noon sunlight casting patchy golden hues. He knew they might be standing where Sarah Clarke met her fate. That afternoon, a preliminary report was sent to the department. The summary read, "Evidence includes light-colored fabric with brown stain, sedan tire tracks, possibly related to the disappearance. Recommend detailed analysis." Black and white photos were developed in the dark room and pinned to the caseboard. Under a microscope, the technician noted the fabric was a cotton-nylon blend, common in women's clothing. An officer remarked quietly that Sarah often wore a light blue blouse to work, but it was still just speculation. No other clues provided clarity. The surrounding area was searched again thoroughly. They checked drainage pipes and under bushes, finding only old newspaper scraps and bottles. Nothing of Sarah's, no body, no handbag, no personal items. Another team of detectives revisited nearby homes, asking about strange noises at night. Most said they heard nothing. An older man vaguely recalled a loud car engine one morning, around the time Sarah vanished, but he wasn't sure which day. The information was fragmented, lacking substance. That evening, when the full report reached the desk of the lieutenant in charge, he read each line, signed it, and added a brief note. This may be the primary scene, possible assault or forced removal. The terse words marked a turning point in case MP 73-142. By the end of the week, an internal meeting was called at Dallas Police Department headquarters. Team leaders agreed to reclassify the case from adult missing person to suspected abduction. The reason noted in the minutes. Physical evidence suggests external interference and the likelihood of the victim being forcibly removed from the scene. This change allowed for broader investigative powers, and the case was temporarily assigned to the Major Crimes Unit for collaboration. Copies of the report and crime scene photos were sent to the city's criminalistics unit for further analysis. A few days later, preliminary blood analysis confirmed it was human, type O. Sarah's family was informed of the development. The mother said nothing, only clutched the printed report, staring at the words, "possible abduction." At the station, younger officers began to sense this was no longer a simple missing person case. But, despite the first lead, every investigative path faced a void. No direct witnesses, no license plate, no clear sign of who interacted with Sarah that morning. The case was officially updated in the file. Its status changed to abduction, under investigation. On the investigation room's pinboard, next to Sarah Marie Clarke's name, a scribbled note appeared. Re-examine Polk Street area. Possible local suspect in Dallas. The summer heat lingered, but in the windowless police department room, no one felt its warmth. A strange silence settled, as if the city were hiding something that had slipped past everyone's notice. The next morning, when the first evidence report came back, the investigation team shifted its focus. A list of potential suspects was drawn up. People who had been present around Polk Street the morning Sarah vanished, especially those who worked, lived, or frequently passed through. On the map, they marked 5 key locations: the Gulf Gas, Ulra Station, a nearby repair shop, a power utility site under maintenance, a small transport company warehouse, and the vacant lot where the fabric was found. From this, 3 names stood out for initial questioning. The first was Harold Denton, a delivery driver for a downtown food company. The second was Henry Bowers, a gas station worker who had given a vague statement initially, and the third was Earl Whitmore, a utility technician who had been working on power lines near Polk Street. The following Monday morning, detectives met Harold Denton at the warehouse where he worked. Harold, about 30, tall and thin, spoke softly. He remembered that morning because his delivery truck was delayed by traffic near Jefferson Boulevard. He said he didn't see any girl resembling Sarah and didn't stop in Oak Cliff that day. His schedule was cross-checked with delivery receipts signed downtown during the time Sarah left home. Still, police collected fabric samples from his truck seats as standard procedure and let him go. Next, Henry Bowers, the gas station worker, was summoned again. He stuck to his original story. That morning, he saw a young girl in a light-colored shirt near the curb, seemingly talking to someone in a car, but he couldn't recall the driver's face or the license plate. Pressed further, he added the car was dark, possibly blue or gray, resembling a common sedan. He insisted he saw no coercion and was busy with customers afterward. When asked about customers that morning, Henry provided a handwritten fuel payment list. One name stood out: E. Whitmore, Dallas Power, and Light. This immediately caught the detectives' attention. They visited the utility company's office in the Western Industrial Area where Earl Whitmore worked. Personnel records showed Whitmore, 26, was assigned to maintain power lines along Polk Street the day Sarah disappeared. He had no serious criminal record, only a minor fine for a bar disturbance years prior. Police contacted Whitmore and asked him to come to the station. He arrived that afternoon wearing a blue work shirt, speaking slowly, and appearing cooperative. He said he drove a company vehicle to the work site that morning, but left before 9 a.m. for another job in South Dallas. Asked if he spoke to any young women, Whitmore said he didn't recall. Police inspected his vehicle, an old dark blue Mercury Cougar with a company plate. Inside were only work tools, a toolbox, wire coils, and motor oil. A technician collected samples from the floor mats and seats for blood analysis per protocol. Whitmore remained calm, even joking. "I didn't think I'd end up a suspect in a TV drama." He signed a voluntary cooperation statement before leaving. That evening, Detective Frank Dwyer noted in the file, Whitmore's time and location align with the victim's disappearance, but no direct evidence. Continue passive monitoring. 3 days later, preliminary lab results came back. The fabric and car mat samples didn't match. The car, mat blood was type A, not the type O from the scene. The report's final note concluded, insufficient grounds for charges. Police re-examined Harold Denton and others on the list. All had solid alibis. The fragmented clues were filed away, none directly connecting to the disappearance. The case shifted to open investigation, monitored but without specific action. In the following weeks, police occasionally revisited Oak Cliff, questioned more residents, and checked reports of suspicious vehicles, but found nothing new. Fall arrived, the weather cooled, the summer heat faded, but Sarah Clarke's file sat on a desk, gathering a thin layer of dust. Earl Whitmore's name remained on the suspect list, lightly crossed out with pencil, not erased. No one in the unit imagined he'd reappear in this case decades later, when all seemed forgotten. But for now, to the Dallas police, Sarah's disappearance was just one of hundreds of unsolved cases awaiting evidence they couldn't find. By late August, as the case entered its third week, the Dallas Police Department decided to expand the search. Commanders reasoned that if Sarah was taken from Oak Cliff, she might have been abandoned in a more complex terrain outside the city. A plan to thoroughly search the area along White Rock Creek, a long, winding stream running through East Dallas, was approved. Many prior missing person cases had ended here, where tall reeds grew and murky water flowed silently between eroded banks. On the morning of the operation, police, firefighters, and K-9 units lined up along the creek, equipped with ropes, flashlights, and maps. From above, a Department Bell helicopter circled slowly, recording aerial footage to identify suspicious areas. Teams moved in a horizontal line, spaced a few meters apart, scanning every patch of grass, mound of dirt, and rocky crevice. The Texas sun blazed, but no one stopped. After nearly 2 hours, a police dog barked frantically near a low-lying area by an abandoned wooden bridge. Officers rushed over. Under dry grass, they saw a small glint. A silver teardrop-shaped earring, tarnished and dusty, lying alone. A technician knelt, gloved, and used tweezers to place it in a clear nylon bag labeled Evidence 014. A photo taken on site was attached to that afternoon's report. When Sarah's mother was called to identify it, she recognized it immediately. It was part of the pair Sarah wore that final day. She said she'd bought them for Sarah's 18th birthday, items her daughter rarely removed. The technician's report noted briefly, "Evidence confirmed as victim's property." Those words made the atmosphere in the police meeting room heavier than ever. In missing person cases, when personal items appear scattered, hope of survival fades. Still, the search continued for days. Teams scoured the creek, moving in segments of a few hundred meters, using iron hooks to drag the water and digging in soft earth. A few other items surfaced, an old plastic piece, a dark fabric scrap, but analysis showed they were unrelated. At night, they lit field lamps to scan the water, seeing only tree shadows reflected on the still surface. Throughout, the dogs detected no scent matching Sarah's clothing, provided by her mother. All efforts led to nothing. The local press ran a short article about the search with a photo of police by the creek, captioned, "Efforts continue." Residents began speculating. Some said the girl was taken far from the city, others that she fell into the water and was swept away. But police released no further detail. All remained conjecture. On the 10th day, the search team leader proposed ending the operation. They had covered over 3 miles along the creek with no unchecked suspicious areas. The final report's last line read, "No further traces or body found. Search paused. Case moves to next investigative phase." The silver earring was stored in the Dallas Police Department's evidence locker, alongside the earlier light-colored fabric. The numbered nylon bags, labeled with marker, were neatly packed in a steel box, locked and sealed. In the Clarke family's small home, the mother sat silently at the table, the matching earring in her hand glinting under the dim yellow lamp. Across the city, the investigation room dimmed its lights, leaving only the glow on the caseboard. On the map, White Rock Creek was crossed out, marked, searched. Beyond the earring, they had found nothing. And as the final report lines were signed, the search officially ended after over 10 fruitless days. Dallas continued its sweltering days. But in case MP 73-142, a new page had just been turned, yet all traces fell silent once more. In early September, after the White Rock Creek search ended, the Oak Cliff Investigation Office still received sporadic calls. An anonymous man claimed he saw a girl resembling Sarah at a bus station on the outskirts of Fort Worth with an older man. When police checked, the station was empty and no one recognized the description. Another woman from a different district insisted Sarah had visited her grocery store the previous week. But when shown a photo, she shook her head, saying, "Maybe I was mistaken." Each lead flickered and faded like faint glimmers in the dark, none clear enough to pursue. The investigators compiled all information, marking leads for further verification. Perhaps Sarah left the city with someone she knew, or was lured by a stranger, but both theories lacked foundation. No financial traces, no communication, no witnesses saw her after that morning. Detectives visited every mentioned location, from the small diner on Jefferson to an old truck lot, finding only empty land and people with no specific recollections. They added brief notes to the already thick file, typed lines sprawled across white spaces. No progress. No new verification results. No suspect vehicle identified. Every effort looped back to the same meaningless cycle. A month later, Lieutenant Dwyer called a brief meeting in the small room behind the station. He reviewed the evidence list, the fabric, the earring, tire tracks, a few crime scene photos. All remained mute. Blood analysis confirmed the stain on the fabric was type O, matching millions, useless for identification. No fingerprints, no DNA, then a foreign concept. He leaned back, silent for a long moment, then said, "We're holding a case with no scene, no witnesses, no suspects." A young officer spoke up. "What about Whitmore? He's still on the watch list." Dwyer nodded but replied, "We can't hold someone on a hunch." Days later, they rechecked Whitmore's work schedule with the utility company. Everything aligned. Colleagues confirmed he left the site on time. Police could only add a note to the file. No new suspicious behavior. Meanwhile, the department took on other cases. Car thefts, assaults, missing minors, all demanding manpower. Thin staffing and limited funding pushed Sarah's case to low priority. Part of the team shifted to a downtown armed robbery investigation. File MP 73-142 sat in a steel cabinet, opened only occasionally for vague tips. Each time, a new sheet was added, numbered, and filed away. By early fall, the press stopped reporting, and Oak Cliff residents grew quiet. Flyers posted at bus stops, and utility poles curled and faded in the sun. The Clarke family visited the station weekly for updates, always met with the same response: "We're still looking." To the investigators, the phrase began to mean, "We haven't found anything." In late October, Dwyer submitted the first phase summary report. The final page stated, "No new physical evidence, no suspect with sufficient grounds for prosecution, investigation suspended." He signed, stamped the date, and closed the file. Outside, rain began to fall. Heavy drops hit the old tin roof, echoing down the empty hallway. Dwyer glanced at Sarah's photo pinned to the board. Her youthful face seemed to gaze back with a strange calm. In his career, he was used to cases without closure, but this one lingered more than usual. He didn't know why, perhaps because it started so simply and ended too soon. When the room's lights went out, file MP73-142 was placed in storage, nestled among dozens of other unsolved cases. Across the city, Dallas's first winter arrived, cold and dry, erasing lingering traces on the ground, and with them, any clues someone had missed. In early 1974, as new cases piled up at the Dallas Police Department, Sarah Marie Clarke's disappearance was officially marked inactive. An internal memo directed all related documents, reports, and evidence to be transferred to the Dallas County Storage Facility. On a cold morning, two young officers carried a sturdy cardboard box containing the case's entirety: maps, crime scene photos, interrogation reports, and a few small evidence bags. The nylon bags had yellowed, labeled in red ink. The light-colored fabric and silver earring were sealed tightly in thick folders marked Evidence A and Evidence B. The box was labeled in bold print, MP73-142, missing person, Clarke, Sarah Marie. When the storage clerk received it, he assigned a new file number, D1-1142. The box was placed on a steel shelf among hundreds of others in a windowless concrete room in the basement of the county administrative building. No one said anything more. It was a routine handoff in the daily administrative process. From that moment, Sarah Clarke's file entered the official silence of the storage system, a world of paper, stamps, and cold codes. For years, no one mentioned it. Lieutenant Dwyer retired. The young investigators moved to other units. Newer, thicker, more urgent files filled the cabinets, pushing older cases lower in the system. When Dallas's file management shifted to computers in the 1980s, the Clarke case wasn't digitized. No conviction, no suspect, no body. Her name existed only on the cover of an old paper file, its glued edges peeling. The Dallas County Storage was a long, damp, cold concrete warehouse near the northern industrial area. The smell of old paper mixed with metal dust and machine oil. Along the corridors, thousands of boxes were stacked, each with a unique code and colored label. Among them, D1-142 was unremarkable, a small code in a sea of data. Each year, clerks performed an inventory, noting, "File intact, no request to reopen." Sometimes dust from the ceiling settled, leaving a gray film on the box's lid. Once, after a major storm, nearby files were water damaged, but D1-142 remained intact, safe in the middle row. No one knew, no one cared. The 1980s passed, then the 1990s. Dallas changed. Skyscrapers rose, highways expanded, new cases dominated headlines. Names in the storage faded from the memories of those who worked on them. Occasionally, a new clerk passed the shelf, saw MP73-142, and assumed it was an unimportant missing person case. No one opened it. No one asked. In the dim room, only the steady hum of ventilation fans and the smell of aging paper marked the years. Box D1-142 stood still for nearly half a century, witnessing countless staff come and go, surrounded by newer files. Everything of Sarah Marie Clarke, the fabric, the earring, black and white photos of broken grass, remained inside, waiting for someone, at some distant moment, to stumble upon it. But in 1974, when the final report was stamped archived, no one at the Dallas Police Department thought the case had a chance to be reopened. To them, it was over, not with answers, but with the absolute silence of paper and dust. In the 1980s, as Dallas entered a boom, the police department evolved. The storage system was upgraded, and old cases were reviewed for classification. Among thousands of files, case MP73-142 remained in the unsolved inactive category. A young sergeant tasked with reviewing pre-1975 missing person cases skimmed Sarah Marie Clarke's name, noting no body, no suspect, insufficient grounds for reinvestigation, then moved on. Box D1-142 stayed in place among rows of faded steel shelves. Each inventory, it was wiped down, marked intact, and returned to silence. Occasionally, a rookie curious about old missing person cases opened the catalog and saw her name, but only read a dry description. Female, 19, missing August 1973, not found. No one recalled the details. The original investigators had retired, passed away, or moved states. Fragmented memories of the case faded with them. In the early 1990s, as Dallas adopted microfilm storage to save space, Clerks were sent to the county archive to scan files. They placed Sarah's file on a lit table, flipping each page through the machine. Reports, crime scene photos, and Lieutenant Dwyer's handwritten notes appeared on a black and white screen. After copying, the original was returned to the box, sealed, and untouched again. From then on, Sarah's file existed only as a few thin film reels in a metal drawer, each labeled with a cold code, MP 73-142, Clarke, SM. Over the next 2 decades, her name surfaced briefly. In 1997, when Dallas formed a cold case unit, officers reviewed unresolved missing person cases. They saw the Clarke case, but quickly dismissed it. No body, no suspect, no testable evidence. It couldn't be reopened. An internal report noted, victim status unverifiable, insufficient legal basis for criminal investigation. In 2003, a freelance journalist writing about Dallas's unresolved disappearances requested information. The police response was curt. Case is inactive. Her article included a brief paragraph about a young girl named Sarah missing since 1973. No one responded. No one recalled more. As DNA technology advanced, Dallas police revisited some old cases with preserved evidence, but Box D-1-142 wasn't considered. No one thought the fabric or earring held value after so long. In 2010, the archive was reorganized and reclassified. A clerk named Richard Barlow noted in the log, Box D-1-142, good condition, no retrieval requests. He affixed a new label, updated the code to the current format, and returned it to its shelf. 10 more years passed. In 2018, Texas launched a major project to digitize old criminal files from large counties, including Dallas. The Texas Digital Archive Initiative aimed to upload all unaccessed data to a central electronic system for future DNA and genealogical analysis. Teams of technicians worked year-round in old archives, scanning files, labels, and boxes, updating digital catalogs. In the 2018 database, the entry D-1-142 missing person, Clarke, Sarah Marie, 1973, was added, recoded as TX-DAL MP-1142. From a dusty cardboard box, the case emerged from oblivion for the first time in nearly half a century. Not because anyone remembered, but because an algorithm demanded scanning all undigitized data. When the Project Progress report was sent to the headquarters in Austin, no one noticed the name. To them, it was just one of tens of thousands of old missing person files. But in the basement of the Dallas storage facility, Box D-1-142 was pulled from the shelf, placed on a lit table, and prepared for the next processing phase. The evidence inside, the fabric, the earring, the black and white photos, was about to be seen again for the first time in 44 years. No one knew that. From that moment, the wheels of the Sarah Clarke case began turning again. Slowly but surely, toward a resolution the city thought time had buried. In March 2020, in the old warehouse on North Lamar, where the Dallas Police Department stored tens of thousands of criminal files, technician Samuel Ortiz was performing a routine inventory for the data digitization program. His work was tedious. Open each old file box, verify codes, note conditions, photograph labels, and reseal. The paper boxes were stacked to the ceiling with labels of all colors: robbery, assault, missing person, closed, 1974. Evidence retained. In the deepest corner of the 7th row, he found a dust-heavy box. Its sturdy brown cover was marked in faded red ink. D-1-142, MP-73-142, Clarke, SM. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible. Ortiz put on gloves, pulled the box from the shelf, and checked the seal. It was still intact and unopened. The tape was frayed, but the red stamp was clear. He carefully untied the straps, photographed it with a digital camera, and placed the contents on the inventory table. Inside were 4 old nylon evidence bags, clouded with age. Each had a paper label attached with yellowed tape, handwritten in blue ink. Exhibit A, cloth fragment. Exhibit B, earring. Exhibit C, soil sample. And Exhibit D, tire print photos. There was also a thin file with original reports, a few photos printed from film, and a typed preliminary report from 1973. Ortiz examined each piece. The light-colored fabric, about 2 inches long, was intact but brittle. A dark brown stain, like dried blood, was visible on the edge. The small silver earring was wrapped in soft paper, sealed in its own nylon bag. He laid each item on an anti-static cloth, photographed them for the record, and filled out the evidence condition form. All were intact with no significant damage. In his routine reports note section, Ortiz wrote, "Preserved samples suitable for modern DNA analysis." He used this phrase only for evidence likely to retain biological traces. That afternoon, he presented the report to the team leader. The leader skimmed it, nodded. "A missing person case from 1973. No body, right?" Ortiz confirmed. The leader paused, then said, "If there's blood, we could try DNA. The new project allows testing old samples for the database." For the first time in nearly half a century, Sarah Marie Clarke's file was proposed for re-examination with biotechnology. An internal form was created in the system, coded TXD 73-142R1, stating, "Request for DNA analysis, Texas DPS Crime Lab, Austin." 2 days later, Ortiz packed the evidence in a specialized secure box accompanied by an electronic transfer receipt. The package was transported in a temperature-controlled vehicle to the Texas Department of Public Safety's Crime Lab in Austin, which processes thousands of samples yearly from across the state. On the road, Ortiz glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing sunlight glinting off the sealed box in the trunk. To him, it was just another task. But a vague feeling prompted him to note in his personal log, "Case D1-142 looks intact, old, but strangely preserved." In Austin, the samples were received by the lab's Biological Evidence Intake Unit. A technician signed off, noting the time and storage conditions. They opened the box in a clean room, using UV light to check for organic stains. The dark brown stain on the fabric reacted strongly, indicating human hemoglobin. The team split the fabric into 2 parts, one for touch DNA testing, the other preserved for reference. Under an electron microscope, the dried blood on the fabric retained intact protein structures, rare for a sample over 40 years old. A veteran technician remarked that this was likely due to the airtight manual storage of the 1970s. Those old nylon bags sometimes preserve better than expected. After 3 days of extraction and amplification, a genetic sequence appeared on the computer, a complete male DNA profile, coded with high reliability. The sample was entered into the national database, CODIS, containing millions of DNA profiles from criminals, suspects, and missing persons across the U.S. The server scanned for minutes, then returned. No match found. This was common for old cases. Most involved individuals were never arrested, or their data wasn't in the system. Still, the team didn't stop. In 2020, Texas had partnered with commercial genealogy companies, allowing expanded searches into civilian DNA databases where millions voluntarily submitted samples for ancestry tracing. A technician named Laura Nguyen was assigned to transfer the Clarke case data to a genealogy platform. She uploaded the profile, requesting matches for distant relatives with at least 15% genetic similarity. The system ran for 2 nights, filtering thousands of results. And on the 3rd morning, 3 names appeared on the screen, all surnamed Whitmore. 1 in Arkansas, 1 in Oklahoma, and 1 in Texas. When Laura opened the demographic map, she saw the Whitmore family was concentrated in Dallas in the 1970s. Cross-referencing old Dallas County citizen records, residency, and work permits, she quickly found a striking match. Earl Whitmore, born 1947, a technician for Dallas Power and Light. The same name noted in the 1973 investigation. This discovery was immediately reported to the Dallas Cold Case Division commander. A small emergency meeting was held online between the Austin Tech team and Dallas investigators. The screen displayed a black and white photo of Whitmore from the old file. A sharp-featured face, evasive eyes, taken during a brief 1973 questioning. Below it was Lieutenant Dwyer's note. Whitmore, utility worker, present in the area, morning of August 2nd, 73. Insufficient grounds for prosecution. The current investigation leader, Lieutenant Ava Moreno, froze as she read the report. Born a decade after Sarah's disappearance, she had seen Whitmore's name while reviewing old suspect lists in the archive. Like others, she had dismissed it as a random name among hundreds. Now, with the genealogy results, everything changed. The Austin lab expanded the analysis, tracing the Whitmore family tree back 4 generations, confirming the DNA likely belonged to a Dallas-based branch in the early 1970s. In that branch, only 2 adult males existed, Earl Whitmore and his brother, deceased since 1989. The genealogy report was sent to Dallas with a note: high probability of direct paternal lineage match. Subject: Earl Whitmore. In Dallas, Ava Moreno immediately requested Earl Whitmore's residency and driver's license records. The system confirmed he was alive, living in Fort Worth, just over 40 miles from the original crime scene. She and her team gathered more details. Whitmore was retired, had 2 minor traffic violations, no criminal record. His wife long deceased, no children. Living quietly, often tinkering with old cars in his backyard garage. A neighbor described him as barely talking to anyone, just working and disappearing into that house. Ava printed 2 photos, one from the 1973 file, one from his current license, and placed them side by side. Despite time's wrinkles, the bone structure, gaze, and a small scar by the right temple matched perfectly. She pinned both to the investigation board, connected by a red string, writing below, "Genetic match, pending confirmation." That night, in the dim glow of neon lights, Ava stood before the board where Earl Whitmore's name sat amid a web of red strings. Nearly half a century later, every path led back to one point. In April 2021, file MP73-142 was marked reopened in the Dallas Police Department system. After decades in storage, Sarah Marie Clarke's name reappeared on the active case list. The reinvestigation was assigned to the Cold Case Division, specializing in decades-old unsolved cases. Leading it was Detective Ava Moreno, a meticulous investigator known for solving complex genealogy cases. On the day she received the file, Ava visited the old storage room at headquarters, a quiet space lined with hundreds of boxes. A technician handed her a sealed box labeled MP73-142, missing person, Clarke, Sarah Marie. She placed it on her desk, untied the straps, and opened it. Inside were yellowed documents, film-printed crime scene photos, and Lieutenant Frank Dwyer's handwritten reports. There was Ortiz's note: possible abduction area, Polk Street. Ava read everything, from the first report to the final archive entry. On her desk, dozens of pages spread out, mixed with faded black and white photos, the light fabric, tire tracks, broken grass, the silver earring. In the corner was Dwyer's faded signature, an echo from the past. She carefully pinned each photo to the board, numbered them, and arranged the timeline from Sarah leaving home to the search's end. It all spanned less than 2 weeks, then silence for 48 years. After 3 days of review, Ava saw everything differently. The new DNA evidence from Austin had reshaped the investigation. The genealogy report pointed directly to the Whitmore family and the old file named one. She found the 1973 interrogation report, 3 pages, hastily written. Whitmore, Earl, utility worker, stated left area before 9 a.m., no direct evidence. Dwyer's handwritten note mentioned a gray utility uniform, Mercury Cougar, registered to Dallas Power and Light. Ava accessed the city's archived personnel records for the utility company. After hours, she found one entry. Earl Whitmore, technician, 1968-1985, retired early. Last address in Fort Worth, 40 miles from Dallas. The pieces began to fit. To verify the old statement, Ava met Henry Bowers, the 1973 Gulf gas station worker, now over 80, living with his daughter in suburban Denton. When told police wanted to discuss the Sarah Clarke case, he went quiet, then said, "I thought they forgot about that." Ava opened a small notebook, showing him a crime scene photo and Whitmore's black and white picture. "Do you remember this man? You said you saw someone in a utility uniform talking to a girl that morning." Bowers put on glasses, holding the photo close. He looked a long time, then nodded slightly. "The shirt's the same, bright logo on the left chest. I remember that. The face. Much older, but the build, the hair. It's that type. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's him." Ava pressed. "Anything about the car?" he replied slowly. Two-door sedan, dark paint, dusty, the kind used for tools. I remember because it was parked right in front of the station, blocking the way. Bauer's confirmation, though not absolute, strengthened the new lead. Ava returned to the office, adding a note. Witness Bowers confirms Whitmore's presence at the scene morning of August 2nd, 73, consistent with genealogy DNA data. She sent a summary to the city prosecutor, requesting to formally reopen the investigation with Earl Whitmore, 74, of Fort Worth, Texas, as the suspect. A warrant for his financial, medical, and movement records was approved within 48 hours. The Cold Case Division's covert surveillance team began monitoring Whitmore's small home, a 1950s-style house in a quiet area with a detached garage. Neighbors described him as reclusive, rarely interacting, shopping only on weekends. Ava requested a trash pull for DNA. One morning, after the garbage truck left, technicians retrieved a soda can and an old toothbrush from Whitmore's bin. The samples were rushed to the Austin lab for comparison with the 1973 fabric DNA. Results returned in just 4 days, a perfect match. The report was printed, stamped in red, and sent to the Dallas County prosecutor with a request for a search warrant. The conclusion was typed in bold. DNA match between 1973 evidence and suspect Earl Whitmore confirmed. 99.98% probability. Ava stood in her office, reviewing the digitized file from Dwyer's initial notes to the current lab report, bridging half a century. She felt as if stepping into the void where Sarah Marie Clarke vanished. That night, she drove through Old Oak Cliff, where scattered wooden houses remained. The narrow streets, yellow streetlights, and old trees seemed frozen in 1973. The next day, Ava and 2 investigators went to Fort Worth, presenting the search warrant to the Tarrant County Court. It was signed that afternoon. A meticulous plan was set. Search Whitmore's home at dawn, seize his car, documents, and items likely to hold biological traces. Before leaving, Ava reopened Sarah's photo from the old file. A brown-haired girl, bright eyes, gentle smile. Below was a faded handwritten note, gone without a trace. She placed the photo back in the folder and closed it. Nearly half a century later, Sarah Marie Clarke finally had a chance to speak. That evening, Ava sent the day's report to the Cold Case Division commander. In the conclusion, she wrote briefly, "Evidence consistent with suspect Earl Whitmore. Cold Case MP 73-142 reopened as active homicide investigation." Outside the headquarters, Dallas was quiet. Streetlights stretched across wet pavement after rain. In Fort Worth, Whitmore's house remained dark, with only a faint light seeping through the garage door crack. No one in the neighborhood knew that, the next morning, the name of the solitary old man would emerge from the shadows, reconnecting a story Dallas forgot in 1973. On the morning of May 11, 2021, the Fort Worth sky was overcast. Thick gray clouds let loose a light rain that speckled the pavement. The Dallas PD Cold Case Division's task force, with local police support, quietly approached Earl Whitmore's small home on Calmont Avenue. The red brick 2-room house had a low porch, overgrown grass around the fence, and a detached garage. The search warrant, signed the previous night and numbered 21 HEV WC14, authorized the inspection of the house, garage, and the suspect's vehicles. At 6 a.m., as Whitmore stepped onto his porch to retrieve a newspaper, he froze at the sight of flashing red and blue lights from the lined-up police cars. 4 officers approached, presenting the warrant. He didn't resist, only asking softly, "What's this about?" Lieutenant Ava Moreno held up the court-stamped order, replying curtly, "A disappearance in Dallas, 1973. On his aged face, a brief expression flickered. Not surprise, but the look of a man hearing something he'd long known was coming. The police split into groups. One team searched inside the house, while another, led by Ava, headed straight to the garage. The iron door creaked, open, revealing the sharp smell of old paint and motor oil. Under flashlight beams in the dusty room stood a 1972 Mercury Cougar, ash gray, its paint remarkably fresh for its age. The hood was lightly dusted, but the undercarriage was clean, as if regularly maintained. Ava approached, examining the old metal trim, her eyes pausing on the driver's side door lock. Inside, the leather seats were cracked, but the floor had a dark carpet that didn't match the original upholstery's weave. A crime scene technician scanned the interior with a UV light, spotting faint glowing patches near the driver's seat base. They cut a small section of the carpet, sealing it in an evidence bag labeled Exhibit E. Meanwhile, from the narrow gap between the seat and the center console, another technician used tweezers to retrieve a single, small, light-colored thread, about 2 centimeters long. Under the bright light, it shimmered a silvery white, visually identical to the fabric collected from the Oak Cliff ditch in 1973. Ava stayed calm, ordering photos, measurements, and a detailed scene report. All evidence was collected and sealed per strict protocol. Opening the trunk, they found an old utility toolbox, copper wire coils, and rusted pliers. At the trunk's base, a dark circular stain was visible on the carpet. A technician applied luminol, and within seconds, a blue-green glow erupted. Blood cleaned long ago. Another small sample was cut, sealed, and labeled Exhibit F. While the tech team worked the garage, the other group searched the house. On the living room table, they found neatly stacked car repair receipts, old newspapers, and a box of sleeping pills. Nothing significant except for a thick envelope of old photos. The images showed power lines, industrial sites, and a few shots from the edge of Oak Cliff, Dallas, likely from the early 1970s. Ava recognized the area instantly, having studied the 1973 crime scene photos hundreds of times. By noon, all evidence was packed, documented, and sent to the Dallas Crime Lab. Whitmore was asked to accompany police to the station to assist with the investigation. As he was handcuffed, he didn't resist, only glancing around the garage one last time, as if checking for anything missed. That afternoon in the lab, technicians extracted DNA from the car carpet and the single thread. A preliminary automated comparison showed a perfect match with Sarah Marie Clarke's DNA profile developed from the 1973 evidence. The blood on the carpet also matched type O, and the same genetic sequence as the old sample. The report was electronically signed and sent to Ava at 5:26 p.m. She reread the final line. Result: positive match between 1973 evidence and vehicle samples. No doubt remained. The old car in the garage was the vehicle that carried Sarah the morning she vanished. After nearly half a century, the surviving evidence, the fabric, the earring, and now the carpet, closed the loop on events time seemed to have erased. Ava stepped into the hallway, standing silently for a long moment. Outside, the sky was still gray, a light rain falling. Each drop broke softly on the window pane, like the slow, persistent pulse of the past returning. She called the Dallas County prosecutor, reporting the lab results and requesting a formal arrest warrant. 20 minutes later, a faxed warrant arrived, clearly stating, homicide, Sarah Marie Clarke, suspect, Earl Whitmore. The next morning, Fort Worth PD transported the suspect to Dallas. The heavy metal door on the second floor of the cold case headquarters closed behind him. In the stark white interrogation room, fluorescent light reflected off the metal table. Earl Whitmore sat across from Detective Ava Moreno, hands clasped, his gray shirt collar slightly crumpled. He'd been transferred the previous night, after the Mercury Cougar samples confirmed the DNA match with the victim. Before him was a thick file labeled MP73-142, Sarah Marie Clarke. Ava placed an unopened water bottle on the table, her voice steady. Mr. Whitmore, today we just want your side of the story. You can remain silent, but I advise you to speak. Whitmore looked up, his gaze pale but calm. I understand my rights, he said softly, and I choose not to answer. Ava showed no frustration. She opened the file, pulling out photos of the fabric and the earring. We found these in the 1973 file, and Sarah's DNA is on the carpet in your car. What do you have to say about that? Whitmore stared at the photos, then met her eyes, his lips twitching slightly. I've got nothing to say. If you're so sure, why ask me? His tone held no defiance, more like a weary man long prepared for this moment. Ava noted quickly on her pad. Subject refuses to elaborate. Tone calm, no visible distress. 2 hours later, 3 interrogators had rotated through. They asked about the Mercury Cougar, why it was repainted. They asked about his work at Dallas Power and Light, but Whitmore gave weightless answers. Bought the car from the company. Repainted for rust. Don't recall what I did that morning. When asked directly if he knew Sarah Clarke, he said, "Don't remember who she is." Ava showed him Sarah's photo, her gentle smile frozen in a black and white frame. Whitmore glanced at it briefly, then turned away. She could be anyone. It's been too long. The room grew heavy. The recorder hummed steadily, light glinting off the metal table. Ava leaned back, speaking slowly. "You know we don't need a confession. The evidence speaks for you. The blood-stained fabric from 1973 matches the DNA in your car. We have a witness who saw you there that morning. And now, genealogy links directly to your family. It all points to one place." Whitmore stayed still, hands neatly on the table, his voice low but clear. "I didn't kill anyone. You can build whatever you want from that data, but I didn't kill her." His words weren't quite a protest, more a reflex from someone who knew denial was futile. In the third hour, Whitmore requested a lawyer. The interrogation paused. The court-appointed attorney, a middle-aged man in a worn suit, entered, whispering to Ava, "My client will exercise his right to remain silent until the formal hearing." Ava nodded, closed the file, and left the room. As the door shut, she glanced through the one-way glass, seeing Whitmore bow his head, his hands rubbing together lightly. He wasn't anxious or trembling, just waiting, like a man for a train long scheduled. Outside in the hallway, the team held a brief meeting. A technician presented an additional analysis. The thread from the car perfectly matched the 1973 seam fabric, woven from the same early 1970s batch sold only at a specific Dallas area department store chain. Then, an independent Austin DNA report confirmed it again. 99.98% match between the samples and the victim. No technical gap could dispute Whitmore's link to the case. A comprehensive report was finalized that day and sent to the Dallas County prosecutor. The first page concluded, "Sufficient physical and forensic evidence links suspect Earl Whitmore to the abduction and homicide of Sarah Marie Clarke. No confession obtained. Prosecution recommended." Ava signed the report, the ink smudging slightly. She needed no confession. The evidence painted the picture. She checked the time. Nearly midnight. Whitmore would be held at Dallas County Jail, awaiting a hearing within 72 hours. Before leaving, Ava returned to the empty interrogation room. The water bottle remained untouched. Whitmore's chair was slightly askew. A faint dust print was on the table, the mark of his hand from his final moments before being led away. She lightly touched Sarah's photo, still on the table, the fluorescent light reflecting in the young girl's eyes. Every piece of evidence, every line in a report, every decision made that day had brought the case back to where it belonged, in the hands of the justice system, not a dusty storage box. The next morning, the prosecutor announced the charges. Earl Whitmore was indicted for first-degree murder based on the DNA, physical evidence, and genealogical data. File MP 73-142 was moved to active homicide, pending trial. After nearly 50 years, Sarah Marie Clarke's disappearance was no longer an unanswered question, but a criminal case with a named suspect, solid evidence, and a final chance for the silence to speak. In late June 2021, nearly 2 months after Whitmore's arrest, the Dallas PD's Cold Case Division received new information from the city's construction records. A plot of industrial land where Whitmore had worked in 1973 was slated for demolition to make way for a new commercial complex. The site, near Interstate 35 and about 10 miles from Oak Cliff, was marked on Lieutenant Dwyer's original 1973 investigation map. Ava Moreno reviewed Dallas power and light records, finding that Whitmore was specifically assigned to maintain power lines through that plot during the week of Sarah's disappearance. She immediately requested a new search warrant, citing the potential for buried evidence or human remains. On the first morning of the excavation, the vacant lot was silent, covered in tall weeds and scattered with rusted steel frames. The forensic team set up a perimeter with yellow tape, evidence tents, and grid markers. A small excavator carefully removed the topsoil, while technicians used ground-penetrating radar and metal probes to scan for anomalies. Near noon, the radar console beeped, showing an irregularity at a depth of about 4 feet. The signal came from a spot noted in old utility records as Pole Hash 42, Maintenance Area, August 1973. Ava ordered the excavator stopped. The forensic team began digging by hand. After a few shovels of earth were removed, the soil darkened, becoming damp and giving off a distinct organic smell. A technician knelt, brushing away the loose dirt with a small trowel. A small, chalky white bone fragment emerged into the sunlight. The team paused, marked the spot with a numbered stake, photographed it from every angle, and then continued clearing the earth with painstaking care. By late afternoon, a partial human skeletal structure was exposed. It included a skull, shoulder bones, and scattered long bones. The position suggested a body had been hastily buried. Nearby, nestled in the soil, were a few small items. A tarnished silver ring with the initials SMC faintly visible, the decayed remnants of a brown leather bag, and a few scraps of light-colored fabric. For a moment, everyone on the site stood still. No one spoke. The only sound was the dry wind whistling through the empty lot. Ava looked down at the remains, feeling as if the entire city was holding its breath. The recovery process proceeded in a heavy silence. Each bone and item was carefully bagged separately, numbered, photographed, and logged with its precise coordinates. The skeletal remains were placed in specialized body bags and sent to the Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office for analysis. The ring and the bag fragments were sent to the evidence lab for trace analysis and DNA testing. The next day, preliminary analysis confirmed that the bones belonged to a female, aged approximately 18 to 22, about 5'5", matching Sarah Marie Clarke's 1973 description. The medical examiner noted fractures on the skull and cheekbone, indicating death by severe head trauma from a blunt object. There were no signs of gunshot wounds or stabbing. The injury was consistent with an attack from a solid, heavy tool. DNA testing was expedited. A sample from the bones was compared to a DNA reference sample provided by Sarah's mother, who was now living in a retirement home in Louisiana. The results came back a week later, a 100% match. The official report reached Ava Moreno's desk, stating, "Skeletal remains recovered at site near I-35 identified as belonging to missing person Sarah Marie Clarke, MP 73-142. The forensic lab's final autopsy conclusion was brief and brutal. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. Reading the report, Ava rested her hand on her desk, closing her eyes for a long moment. She thought of Sarah's mother, who had lived for 48 years with an unanswered question. She knew she would have to call her, and she knew it would be one of the hardest calls of her career. The next day, Ava and a victim's advocate from the prosecutor's office drove to the quiet suburb of Garland. The mother's small house was neat, with well-tended rose bushes in the front garden. When Ava delivered the news that Sarah had been found and that they knew what had happened to her, the old woman went completely silent. She didn't cry. She simply reached for a framed photo of her daughter on the mantelpiece and clutched it to her chest. "I always knew she was out there somewhere," she said, her voice soft but steady. I needed to know where. Thank you for finding her." Ava could only nod, an apology for the decades of silence lodged in her throat. Back at police headquarters, the discovery of the remains was kept confidential as the investigation entered its final phase. All the new evidence, the ring, the bag fragments, the soil samples, was sent to the Austin lab for further testing. The leather bag held faint blood traces that matched Sarah's DNA. The fabric scraps matched the weave of the 1973 evidence. There was no doubt. This was the primary crime scene where Sarah had been killed and hastily buried. Ava met with the prosecutor and her team to compile the unbreakable chain of evidence: the 1973 fabric with the stranger's DNA, the genetic genealogy leading to the Whitmore family, the matching DNA from Whitmore's trash, the witness statement placing him at the scene, the blood and fabric in his car, and now the victim's remains, with a cause of death that fit the evidence of a violent attack. Earl Whitmore was no longer just a suspect. He was now the defendant in a murder case with a body, a cause of death, and a mountain of physical evidence connecting him to the crime. On July the 2nd, a closed press conference was held at Dallas PD headquarters. The district attorney stood at the podium and made a brief announcement. "After nearly 50 years, we have located the remains of Sarah Marie Clarke. The cause of death has been determined to be severe cranial trauma. The suspect in custody, Earl Whitmore, will now be formally charged with first-degree murder. The news was not yet blasted across the front pages, but within the law enforcement community, it was recognized as the closing of one of the city's oldest and coldest cases. That evening, Ava returned alone to the excavation site. It was dark now, the lot illuminated only by the headlights of her car. The wind carried the smell of damp earth and the hum of night insects. She stood at the edge of the now filled-in excavation, looking at the patch of earth that was once a shallow grave. She thought of that morning in 1973, a routine day that ended in a moment of violence that had remained hidden for half a century. Now, they had finally brought Sarah home, restoring her name, her story, and her dignity. She was no longer just a missing person in a file. She was a victim who would finally see justice. Ava's end-of-day report to her superiors was characteristically brief. Remains confirmed, cause of death, blunt force trauma, case officially classified as homicide, solved with physical evidence. Below, she signed her name, setting the pen down slowly. After nearly half a century, Dallas had reclaimed a buried memory, and with it, a truth that many thought was lost to time forever. The Dallas County Courthouse, March 2022. Outside, the Texas sky was a bright, hard blue, the early spring sunlight glinting off the building's time-dusted white stone columns. Dozens of reporters and camera crews waited at the entrance, microphones raised, lenses focused, as a corrections van carrying Earl Whitmore pulled to a stop at the secured rear entrance. The 74-year-old man, silver-haired and dressed in an ill-fitting gray suit, hands cuffed in front of him, was led slowly inside. His face was a mask of calm detachment. For the first time in nearly half a century, the name Earl Whitmore was about to be spoken in open court, the central figure in the trial for the longest-standing murder case in Dallas County history. Courtroom 3 was packed. On one side sat Sarah's remaining family, including her elderly mother, who clutched a small, worn photograph. On the other sat a handful of curious onlookers and reporters. Representing the state of Texas was Assistant District Attorney Douglas Kane, a prosecutor known for his methodical approach to complex cold cases. He stood before the jury, his hand resting on a stack of files nearly a foot high. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice resonating in the hushed room. "This case is not merely about a crime buried in the earth. It is about a truth buried by time. The victim, Sarah Marie Clarke, disappeared from the face of this earth in 1973. Today, after 49 years, we are here because science and the relentless dedication of law enforcement has unearthed that truth. And that man," Kane said, turning to point a steady finger at the defendant, "Earl Whitmore, is the one who took her life." On the large screen behind him, the prosecution displayed a chronological sequence of evidence. The 1973 crime scene photos of the light-colored fabric, the silver earring, the modern DNA reports with their complex genetic sequences, side-by-side comparisons of the fabric from the ditch and the thread from the Mercury Cougar, and finally, the somber photographs of the excavated remains and the silver ring engraved with SMC. Each image was accompanied by clear, concise testimony from a forensic expert or investigator. Dr. Laura Nguyen, the DNA specialist from the Texas Department of Public Safety, was the state's first key witness. She patiently explained the process of extracting a male DNA profile from the 1973 blood stain, the entry into the CODIS database with no match, and the subsequent genealogical search that pointed directly to the Whitmore family. "There is no statistical margin for error that is meaningful in a courtroom," she stated firmly. "The probability that this DNA came from anyone other than a member of Earl Whitmore's direct paternal lineage is less than 1 in 100 billion. Next, Lieutenant Ava Moreno took the stand. She outlined the investigation's logical thread, from the rediscovery of the file in the storage warehouse to the genetic genealogy breakthrough, to the search of Whitmore's garage and the eventual excavation of Sarah's remains. Her testimony was a quiet, powerful narrative of persistence. "We didn't have a miracle," she told the jury. "We had evidence. And that evidence, buried for nearly half a century, told the entire story. It led us to that car, to that man, and finally, to Sarah Clarke." Throughout the testimony, Sarah's mother sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the proceedings. When the photo of the silver ring was displayed, she bowed her head, a single tear tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. The defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer named Mark Ellison, did his best to create reasonable doubt. He objected to the admission of the DNA and genealogical evidence, arguing that the aged items lacked a perfectly documented chain of custody and that the use of civilian genetic databases violated his client's constitutional rights. Your Honor, he argued, we cannot reconstruct the past with computer algorithms and probabilities alone. The law must rest on concrete, physical evidence and eyewitness testimony, not theoretical matches. The prosecution countered swiftly. Your Honor, this is not science fiction. This is forensic science conducted under the most rigorous national standards. Every sample was preserved, sealed, and verified. The chain of custody is unbroken. The evidence is what it is. The judge allowed the evidence to stand. For 3 days, the jury heard from a parade of experts, forensic anthropologists, textile analysts, blood spatter specialists, each adding another layer of certainty to the state's case. The fabric samples were shown to be identical. The blood in the car trunk was an exact genetic match to the victim. The fractures on the skull were consistent with a blow from a heavy tool, like the wrench found in Whitmore's garage. Throughout the trial, Earl Whitmore said almost nothing. He sat upright, his hands folded on the defense table, occasionally glancing toward the high courtroom windows, as if watching for a change in the weather. When asked by the judge if he wished to testify in his own defense, he shook his head and uttered a quiet, "No." Reporters noted that he displayed neither fear nor remorse, only the resigned air of a man who had long been waiting for this day to arrive. On the 4th day, the prosecution delivered its closing argument. Douglas Kane walked slowly toward the jury box, making eye contact with each member. For nearly 50 years, he said, his voice deep and firm, no one knew where Sarah Clarke went. What happened on that hot August morning? We, as a city, could have forgotten. But science does not forget. The DNA in the defendant's car is the past, speaking to us. The blood-stained fabric, the silver ring, the earring, the bones, they all tell one story. And that story leads directly and irrevocably to the desk of Earl Whitmore. The defense, in its closing, made a final desperate attempt to plant a seed of doubt. No one saw a crime, Ellison implored. There is no confession. No one can place Mr. Whitmore at the scene of a murder. Can you convict a man, so many years later, on technology alone? But the evidence was a fortress. Kane stood for his final rebuttal, facing the jury one last time. The technology doesn't convict him, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He convicted himself. He left his mark on that young woman, and he left her DNA in his car. We don't need an eyewitness to know the truth. The truth has been waiting in the ground for 49 years. The jury retired to deliberate. They took less than 3 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, their faces were solemn. The courtroom deputy handed the verdict form to the judge. The judge's voice was clear and unwavering in the silent, tense room. On the count of murder, in the first degree in the death of Sarah Marie Clarke, we the jury find the defendant, Earl Whitmore, guilty. There was no outburst, no cry of victory or anguish. A collective exhale seemed to pass through the room. Whitmore raised his head slightly, his eyes scanning the faces in the gallery for a moment, before he lowered his gaze again, his jaw tightening. Sarah's mother closed her eyes, her hand tightening around the photograph in her lap. Ava Moreno, sitting behind the prosecution table, closed her notebook and took a deep, quiet breath. Nearly half a century of waiting had ended with a concise, clinical verdict, as final and unemotional as the act that had started it all. The following week, the court reconvened for sentencing. Given Whitmore's age and the era of the crime, the prosecution did not seek the death penalty. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When asked if he had anything to say, Earl Whitmore stood, looked at the judge, and delivered his final chilling statement to the court. "I've got nothing to say," he murmured. "The past is the past." The brief, remorseless statement was recorded in the official trial minutes. The verdict was entered into the record on March 14, 2022. In his final remarks, the judge noted, "This case stands as proof that while justice can be delayed, its obligation to the truth never expires." As Whitmore was led away, the flash of cameras lit the hallway. The heavy door of the transport van closed with a definitive thud, its engine roaring to life as it carried him away to begin his sentence. Inside the courthouse, Ava Moreno stood for a moment, looking at the placard beside the courtroom door. State of Texas versus Earl Whitmore. She felt the profound weight of a long-closed chapter finally being sealed. Upstairs, Prosecutor Kane packed the thick files into a storage box, saying softly to a colleague, "A case 50 years cold, but the evidence never lost its voice." Outside, the Dallas sky was clear, the sunlight warm on the courthouse steps, as if the city itself was finally able to lay a long-held ghost to rest. The story of Sarah Marie Clarke is not just about solving a cold case. It is a reflection of a modern America looking into its past, a nation grappling with its unresolved history, determined to pursue justice no matter how many years have passed. The persistence of individuals like Detective Ava Moreno and technician Samuel Ortiz demonstrates a core value in our society, a belief in science, a faith in the legal system, and a moral duty that does not have an expiration date. A properly preserved piece of fabric, a seemingly minor note about potential DNA testing, these became the keys that unlocked a truth hidden for generations. It is a profound lesson about diligence and the significance of every small action in our daily work. What we do today, however minor it seems, can shape the justice of tomorrow. This case also underscores the immense power and accompanying responsibility of technology and genetic data in our modern world. As genealogical technology becomes a standard tool for identifying perpetrators, it forces us to confront critical questions about privacy, ethics, and the limits of using personal information. We live in a world where data is power, and this story reminds us that such power must be wielded with transparency and a deep sense of responsibility. Ultimately, the story of Sarah Marie Clarke is a reminder to every citizen that truth can be buried, but it never vanishes. Justice delayed is still justice, and it is human perseverance, from a mother who never stopped clutching her daughter's photo to the investigators who refused to close the file, that keeps the promise of a just society alive. In an often turbulent America, this story teaches us that sometimes the most important thing we can do is to simply keep searching for the truth, even if it takes a lifetime. Thank you for following the story of Sarah Marie Clarke. Her case is proof that while justice may be delayed, it is never truly denied. Subscribe to our channel as we continue to explore other cold cases, where the past still waits patiently for its chance to speak through the unwavering voice of truth.